You're singing along to a music video. You go to look up the lyrics, but the music stops. YouTube Premium has background play, so you can switch apps and keep listening. Try YouTube Premium with 1 month free and sing uninterrupted.
Hello, everyone, and good evening to all. My name is Amari Souza, and I'm an assistant professor of communication design. On behalf of Texas State University, I would like to welcome you all to the State of Black Design. Tonight, we'll feature prominent design leaders, academics, organizers, and activists. Our collective will be split across 4 categories: industry, professional organizations, academia, and design activism. Our first panel will explore the latest ideas, trends, current events, and positionalities in the field of design. Panelists will share their insights from their personal experience and expertise, both as a method to expand voices and to increase diversity. Please allow me to introduce, first, Bekah Marcum, pronouns she and her, product designer / organizer of Black Designers of Seattle. Samuel Adaramola, pronouns he, him, forgive me for mispronouncing your name, creative director at Grassroots Law Project. Renee Reed, UX design researcher at LinkedIn, and Erwin Hines, creative director at Basic Agency. The very first question that we'll ask today, the very first question that we'll ask today is that there is a historical perpetuation of racist tropes in the design industry, from packaging like Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, fashion brands that have been inspired by blackface, architectural redlining, and inaccessibility. And sports teams like Washington football team, which recently just rebranded their trademark. What should our response be as Black designers to these the recent move to rebranding a lot of these racist trademarks of the past that still exist today?
So I'll jump in. Okay, so I think it's a very nuanced thing, right? Like I think rebranding is table stakes. That's great. But at the same time, I've been speaking a lot about the idea of space identity, which is a term that's used within the space of urban planning. And it just acknowledges the fact that the buildings that exist in cities and neighborhoods, they're not just backdrops to the lives we live, but they actually inform how we see ourselves and how people see us. And they inform our identity and what we tell ourselves about ourselves in the future. So they actually inform how we develop. In the same way, brands have actually created that same thing, right? They hold space in people's hearts and their minds. And in such, they've actually shaped the perception of individuals, oftentimes utilizing the energy, the sauce, the dopeness from marginalized communities, but erasing the Blackness. And they only tell one specific or a very narrow story of that Blackness without acknowledging the Black part. And so what that ends up doing is it narrows other people's perception of who we are, other people's perception of the power that we have, the energy that we have, and paints a one-dimensional thing. And so, yes, they should rebrand, but at the same time, the trajectory that they have created within society based on all of the images that they have put out there, that doesn't change with them just changing their logo. That doesn't erase with them just erasing or changing their packaging. So I think on top of rebranding, they actually need to do the internal work, obviously, but they also need to step up and utilize that platform that they built on the backs of, and I'm just speaking for me as a Black man, on the backs of Blackness, and acknowledge it and speak about it and actually talk about the nuances and beauty of Blackness and bring in Black creatives and Black leaders within those organizations to tell those stories in an authentic manner. Because to me, the future of brands is are brands that are actually not only like outwardly showcasing that they support, but they're corporate citizens and their platform brands that actually act as a platform for the voices and the people that support them, i.e. something like a Nike, right? Like they step up, of course, they're not perfect, but they step up and they actually provide platforms for individual stories. They provide platforms for people like LeBron James to actually do what he's doing. And to me, like that's the direction these brands should move in if they've been built on the backs of these stories of Blackness.
I think that's actually a great answer, and it's an awesome segue into our next question. Now more than ever, it's necessary for Black voices to be at the table when creating design approaches for our communities. How do we get more Black voices and talent into the design industry?
I will go ahead and start off here. First, I just want to take a moment and just acknowledge this space that we have here to just hold these authentic conversations. And for everyone who's watching, you are in for a treat for the next 2 hours. So sit back, relax, take your pens, papers, notepads, get to snapping. This is going to be a good time. So thank you, Amari, and for your team for putting this together. So Black voices and Black design at the table. I want to push this question a little bit further. I think we've been talking about getting design at the table for a while and definitely getting Black voices and presence at the table. I like to be a little bit of a provoker and push that to say we need position at the table, not just presence at the table. So who is at the head of the table making the decisions? Who is the highest person paid in that room? And I think that's where we need to start pushing these conversations of not just having Black presence in the room, but who are the decision makers that are representative of the communities that we're trying to bring in as well. So, you know, in an amazing rush of talent that's coming into design, that's been in design, I want to start seeing, or I'm going to say I want to, but it's important for the industry to start pushing these individuals and communities up and supporting these communities, not just at the table, but beyond, to have that presence and position. And then listen, if people don't want to come to the table because they don't have a voice or a space, let us support those who build their own table as well.
I think that's an awesome answer. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge how awesome I think both your head wrap and your spiral staircases in the background. I'm admiring both. They're both pretty awesome. The next question I wanted to ask is the industry pulling up Black talent from the collegiate level effectively? And if not, how can we better attract Black talent into the field from the collegiate level?
So I'll sneak in here. I would say not enough. Like I've seen like some folks start to do it. Like I sent my own recruiter to a historically Black college like a week ago because there was some event there. But I would say that there's too many folks who are going to colleges that have design departments that aren't diverse. And they're surprised when they're not pulling in these diverse candidates, which is absurd. And so it's like people need to go to the historically Black colleges, go to the community colleges that are more accessible to POCs, and actually go to the places where these people are in order to do that. But that takes time, and so it's like it's so important to invest your energy instead of just words, which are useless. Like it's really easy to have that talk and say, yes, we want to bring in more designers of color, but actually taking the steps and doing the legwork, finding people that you may have not found if you just put it out online is so important. Then keeping them is also key.
I think that's
am I able to chime in?
Of course.
All right. So just building off of those 2 points, I just want people to acknowledge the what minority and what Black designers bring to the table. At the end of the day, we've had to hold space for everybody else our entire life. Therefore, we are very empathetic and we are coming at things with a very universal mindset. And when you have a bunch of white designers and white creatives creating for the world, they're not creating for the world, they're creating for themselves, because they can only create for themselves based on their perspective and what they've been taught. They've been taught their history, they've been taught about people who look like them. So every time they actually come to the table, they can only analyze everybody else in terms of data and data points, which doesn't actually give you a very human or nuanced concept or perception of that individual. So it's essentially, they end up creating something that's very narrow and doesn't have as much impact. And so if you want to truly have impact as a brand and as an organization, let Black designers have a seat at the table, and not only have a seat at the table, but be the head of the table, because they are the ones who are actually able to understand with a more nuanced perspective the world. Not only white people because we learned about them, but a lot of other cultures because we learned about them in school, right? Like for us, we had to learn about our own history at home. So no one else really knows about us other than us. And so we bring a very nuanced perspective because we had to hold space. And that's what the design industry is all about. It's about empathy and creating for other people.
I'm just being quiet because I really appreciate what you just said. And I'm just trying to let that soak in. The next question I would ask is, considering the lack of diversity in the industry, what support or lack of support is there for junior design talent in the industry?
I'll start, but I'm going to punt this over to Sam too, so that he can chime in. But yeah, I think what we've seen over time is that, you know, if you look at job postings and if you look at just how teams have been structured, you know, all through the industry, there's a lot of heavy focus on senior talent and people who've been in industry for some time. And I think there has to be some intentional effort to make sure that the younger designers are getting the opportunity to sit in and be in these spaces where they can learn, where they can grow at all different levels, right? And I think what's unfortunately happening, especially for Black designers who are graduating from programs that may not be as familiar or popular in terms of like big PWI type programs, they're getting left behind, and they're not getting probably that same opportunity to get those internships like some of their counterparts who are part of bigger programs. I also challenge organizations and the industry to say, listen, you know, bringing in senior talent is great. You want leadership, you want people who have understanding, but let's face it, when you've been doing something for so long, you're biased to your own work. You're probably, you know, just doing some of the same things, and you're probably a little bit harder to teach because you've just been doing things for a long time. So getting someone who has new perspective, who is hungry, who just wants to learn, you know, that's a great addition to a team, to a culture. So, and to help cultivate those young minds into, you know, hopefully great leaders. So I think we as organizations, as industry, have to do our part to make sure that we're cultivating space and opportunity for young Black designers, for junior designers, so that they too can grow, have this trajectory, and be a part of the growth and be the leaders in the industry in the future, and do amazing things, because they are doing some amazing stuff now. We just need to give them that opportunity. Sam?
Yeah, and if I may, I'd also want to shout out those who have taken like untraditional paths, who didn't get the opportunity to go, you know, to a premier school on either coast, or to have to reevaluate their career much further along. And those people do still offer rich experiences, and, you know, they may be junior in design, but they're senior in other aspects that can influence a lot of decisions that are, you know, design-based decisions. So I just wanted to also throw that out there, that that's something that's also worth considering.
I think that's awesome. And Sam, I apologize again for mispronouncing your last name. Could you correct me so that we put adequate respect on your name?
Do you want the accent or not?
Yes, please.
Adaramola from Nigeria. That's a Nigerian last name.
I respect that. All right. So my next question, I'm gonna kick to you as well, sir.
Mhm.
As an accomplished professional in the industry, could you list and explain some of the barriers you had to overcome as a person of color, and B,
Mhm.
um, has there been any noticeable changes, industry changes in your treatment since the recent Black Lives Matter protests?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a black man, if you can't tell by looking, but I'm an immigrant as well, and I spent majority of my life undocumented rather, and I faced deportation at one point in time, and I'm what you would consider a dreamer, but I didn't have DACA. It wasn't available at the time I was facing deportation. I also grew up in low income in a low income household, and I'm a first generation college student, graduate. And when I think about what led to my career path, it's always been a journey that's been constantly overcoming barriers. And I think knowing why my parents left Nigeria to come to America, a country with generations that still know colonization and the damage that it's done, I think about why it takes longer for immigrant cases to be processed for green cards and permanent residence for people from Black countries and Latin American countries than it does for people who come from European countries. And also growing up, in that low income, you kind of feel like all these things are happening to you because you're Black. And it's not until you kind of grow up that you realize that these things are happening because they were designed to happen that way. There's a reason that we have 45 in the White House who is only banning certain countries and not others from coming into America. So my perspective is kind of like a Black globalist perspective, an Africanist, if you will, perspective that identifies that Blackness is universal, and we are going through things in America that people are, other Black people are going through in South America and in Europe and all over the place. But for me, I kind of, and I think for a lot of Black people, I stumbled into design out of survival. I couldn't get the name brand clothes, so I had to draw on shirts, draw on shoes myself. I literally paid rent in college, paid tuition in college by throwing parties. And I had to design those flyers. I learned Photoshop by designing flyers to get people to come to those parties. So it was a means of survival. And there's also this barrier for me that I had to prove to my friends and family, well, mostly my family, and honestly to myself that, design is a viable career path. Because most people who are coming from low income families, who are first generation, you're the first. So you're thinking about what's going to be the career path that is just going to have the most money, not necessarily what you're most interested in. So there's that barrier of overcoming the pressure of becoming a doctor or lawyer or engineer, and actually do something that you're interested in. And the second part of your question about noticeable changes in the wake of the protests and, dating back to Ferguson and most recently, you can name a lot of names of these victims, and especially this year, there's been a turning point, it seems. And I'm sure a lot of the panelists here can attest that, they've gotten approached by non-Black people asking what can we do? And I just really feel that, we as Black people are overburdened with being the solutions for problems that we ourselves did not create. And be that as it may, we still have to look out for our own. When we're able to get past the gate, we have to hold the gate open and make sure that we bring others in. And I respect a lot of the panelists here that you'll hear from who are creating these spaces. But honestly, we can't do it ourselves. We need those allies. We need people to speak up and advocate for us. And if you look to your left and you look to your right and you see that the people that are around you look like you, talk like you, act like you, there's a problem there. And we here, the best we can do is advocate for ourselves and advocate for others and use these spaces and continue to build on these spaces so that we can, stop forcing the gate open, because it gets tiring holding that gate open. We need somebody there to hold it for us. So, yeah.
jumping in on that, actually. I work in tech, and for me, the issue getting in was access. You know, with tech, they love the referral culture. And so it's great for the individual. It's great for someone who's going to rack up those bonuses, but it creates an entire divide that really perpetuates this, you know, fully homogenous workforce. You know, because like if I as an individual are going to reach out to my community and bring people in, you know, when only 3% of the design community is Black, then, you know, it's pretty much going to stay the same or get worse. And I think that is just a massive, when you tie that in with people not actually going to these Black spaces to find this talent, that creates a huge problem. But kind of with what Sam was saying, once these very few and far between Black folks get into these spaces, they're then expected to solve the problems of that space. And so I think since the whole BLM, since like all the protests started, I have honestly heard too much about companies spinning up these initiatives, these groups, these whatever else to help with their diversity issues. And most of those are by like volunteering their Black and POC employees to like help them out. And there's no additional compensation. There's no, you know, just reorganizing of the work in order to, one, pay them for what they're doing, but then also be cognizant of the emotional toll that your Black employees or your POC employees are having to take in their workplace, and just rehashing their Black trauma for the betterment of a company. And so it's like, if you're going to have that, first of all, make a space where they're not expected to be your racism guru in this time, but then also make sure that you're compensating them accordingly. Whether that is time, whether that is having access to like Black mental health professionals to help them with this time. It's like, that is so necessary. So you're not just like burning out these people in the workforce, because they're already dealing with microaggressions. Like they're already dealing with being the only one in their spaces. And so it's like, how are you going to make sure you can hold on to this talent that's so necessary? Because like, as Erwin was saying, they bring something that is totally different to the table. It's like, we've been code switching all our lives. And so we're able to realize how we show up in different areas and see how people perceive us. So we can say like, hey, you know what, this is not design. Different people are going to come to it in different ways. And so it's like, it not only has to be recognized, like the value, but then it also has to be compensated.
Yeah, and if I may, I don't know where we're at with time, but it kind of makes me think about the first question about, is rebranding enough? And I think we as designers here, you know, my colleagues here, they can attest. I think when people often think of rebrand, they just think, oh, we need a new logo. Oh, we need a color palette. Oh, let's switch up the pattern. But it's also those intangible things like, what are our values? How are we showing up for people? How are we delivering on the promises? Are we keeping those promises? A new logo is not going to fix institutional racism. You know, a new color palette is not going to fix bigotry. All right, so when you think about rebranding, you also have to think about how you're going to restructure, who's showing up, you know, who's in that room, you know, so we don't have people thinking a can of Pepsi is going to solve police brutality. You know what I'm saying? So we got to make sure that people are in those rooms, you know, when you have these moments, like a lot of these, you know, the Washington football team, I'm from the DMV, I support them. I was so happy when they changed the name. I believe we were cursed for many seasons because we had that stupid name. And shout out to us for winning our first game. But, you know, these organizations like Aunt Jemima and all these places, they've existed for over 100 years and they have refused to adapt with the time. So it makes you question, you know, who are they keeping out from being in those rooms? Like, why did it have to take 100+ years for you to finally change the name, for you to finally think about not having that packaging? So I think when we think about rebranding, it has to be more than just the bells and whistles. It has to be like, who's on the board? You know, who's making these decisions? Let's rebrand that first.
Yeah, it's a evolution and a revolution of just reconstruction and of just reconstructing things where there's actually things that need to be deconstructed, things that need to be torn down and then rebuilt versus just kind of flipping it around and just doing something different and restructuring. No, there needs to be a total destruction of it and just kind of taking a step back and rebuilding. And that's not the case in every situation, but there's certain things where if it's just performative and it's not about progression and really progress, then it's all for show, it's very temporary. And so during these times, to your point, Bekah, of, you know, everyone just kind of showing up, or Sam, you're mentioning to everyone changing all their logos and things like that, I think what's going to be really important is the accountability part in all of this post BL. Well, it's not fucking post, we're still in this, but the accountability of how did you show up right after, but how did you show up a year from now, 2 years from now? What does that progress and that progression look like from internships, from people being in the room? I was just thinking while you all were talking, I was like, we always talk about seat like it's a singular thing. We need to be having seats. It needs to be plural, you know, it needs to be just this full representation in these spaces, that at this time where people are listening. I will also say that we have a responsibility that our voices need to be even louder. So even if you have that seat at the table, if you're not using that seat to help move everyone along, then I will challenge you to either make way for someone else to come and be a voice, and step aside a little bit, because that is an opportunity and a privilege to have and hold that space. So yes, take up space when you get it, hold that space, but don't just toss it away. And I think in this, you know, like you mentioned, in Amari, in your question about kind of what's happening now since the BLM and everyone's listening because everyone had a chance to be still, I think this is the time where we do just have a lot more of a stance and a presence. I will say this one last thing. I'm sorry, I'll let you go, Erwin. And even in the times when I was the only Black woman in a room, people would always ask me, how did you hold your space or be able to find that confidence to speak your truth? And I dug my heels into the fact that I always knew that there were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of my ancestors walking in that room with me and in that room with me. And so I bring that strength and that power. And so I literally can physically feel and see the presence. And so that's what usually takes me over, but I want that to translate into the physical as well and see my people in the room.
I think you guys made a lot of beautiful points just now. I know we have about 2 or 3 minutes before we have to jump to the next panel. To take care of a couple of quick things. If you guys aren't aware, you can live tweet with us, hashtag State of Black Design. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel for future programming. And jumping back into this, one thing I wanted to say is I have deep, deep, deep admiration and respect for you guys and the accomplishments that you guys have made in industry and practice. I know that whenever we've talked privately, that's one thing that I always do bring up and mention is my adoration and respect for where you guys are and the things that you've been able to accomplish. Also being a first generation American, you know, there is this expectation that you have to go out and do great things to set the example for those that are coming up behind you. But being first generation, you know, it's hard when you don't have that representation, people that look like you within industry that are represented. So the final question I have for the 4 of you, and please forgive me because I'm not leaving you guys much time, is if you could speak to yourselves as freshmen, what advice would you give yourself? And this is the metaphorical you, because there are students that are watching this now that are in their freshman foundation years of college. So if you can give me maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds apiece, what advice would you give freshman you? Erwin, sorry. Erwin, let's start with you.
I think it actually rolls off of Renee's point. I would have told myself to bring my full self and to know that I have the strength of all of my ancestors with me. And that is the beauty of Black culture. While Candace Owens was like, why do you guys support each other? And like, that's the problem with Black people. We reach back to support the least of us. And like, that's what's great about us. We have always stood with each other as a community. To me, we are the foundation of what represents freedom in America. We fought for the freedoms that everybody enjoys. And so to me, it's recognizing our strengths. Dig into your history. If you are a young Black person, dig into your history, understand you come from greatness. And everywhere you go, you are bringing that greatness with you. Every brand, every company, every organization wants to pull from what is your culture, what is of you. And on top of that, I would say, look to create your own things, own your own things, create your own spaces so that you can actually create spaces and opportunities for others. While I don't like all of Tyler Perry's movies, obviously, I do love the fact that he owns everything. He created a space that he can now hire. And to me, if people are profiting on our culture, there's something there, obviously. So why can't we profit? Why can't we pave the golden roads for ourselves? And I would say, like, look at your story, understand your power, because your story is what writes culture, what writes the future, and culture is what drives commerce.
All right. I love all of that. I I really do. I want to thank you guys. I feel like you guys shared some really insightful things, and I just look forward to see what people have to say about some of the pieces that you guys shared. Again, I have the utmost respect and love for you guys and the stuff that you do. And I look forward to continuing to collaborate with you guys in the future. All right. Tip my hat off to you guys. All right.
Thank you, Omari.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're gonna jump into our second panel, which is about Black professional collectives. The Black Collectives panel will feature prominent leaders in the Black design community. This discussion will explore the need for safe spaces for designers of color and provide details on how predominantly white institutions have neglected voices of color. On this panel, we have Maurice Sherry, he, him, his, founder and host of Revision Path, one of my favorite podcasts. And if you're not subscribed, you should do so now. We have Bekah Marcum, still joining us from our first panel. We have Jacinda Walker, she, her, and hers, founder and creative director of Design Explorer. And we have Terrence Malign, he, him, his, and founder of AAGD, African American Graphic Designers. I'd like to welcome you guys. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Pretty good.
I just want to talk about the last panel, but like for like 2 more hours. So we'll have to schedule another one, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen after each one.
Yeah, next time we're just gonna have to do this for a little bit longer. But I know that you guys are gonna bring some insightful tidbits for this one as well too. So let's jump in. The lack of diversity in design workspace acts as a gate which keeps voices within the Black community out of the design and creation process. Are there actual safe spaces for Black designers in the industry or in collective organizations related to the industry?
I can have, Maurice, you want to take this one, or I can hop?
I'll start it off. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Why not? Do I think there are actual safe spaces for Black designers in sort of like workplaces? Absolutely not. I don't. I've seen where certainly there are companies that may create, employee resource groups and things of that nature, which I think are great. Those are always great to have workers kind of bond together over a shared affinity, but those are still in some aspect ruled over by whomever might be in the C-suite that is not a Black person or not a person of color. And I say not a person of color because oftentimes whiteness doesn't necessarily manifest itself through white people. There can be certain sort of insidious aspects that crop up from non-Black people of color. However, do I think that there are these safe spaces within those kinds of organizations? I really don't. I think there's only so far that you can go when it comes to that, because you're still sort of bound by whatever the rules are of wherever it is you work, an employee handbook or something like that. So inside corporate workspaces, I'm not convinced of that.
Bekah, do you want to add in?
Yeah, I mean, all of that. I would say that it's absolutely true, because I mean, even by the definition of, like, again, there's only 3% of Black folks in the workforce as far as design. There's really no ability to, there's so much structural prejudices and racism that, that do affect you. Like if I'm a very vocal person in the workplace. Like I used to congratulate my manager every year on my anniversary I was like, hey, this is the year that your team got 100% more diverse. And it was still a thing where it's like, however more I was going to talk about race, talk about design, it was like, it almost became a like, oh, well, it's just a big thing for her, but it's not actually the case. And so I think as far as safe spaces, being able to actually like show up when we're still in like a design industry that puts things out like, the coolest monkey in the jungle shirt with like H&M. Like I think that in itself kind of shows that it's not quite safe for people to fully speak up.
So I kind of define safe spaces as being somewhere where you could be without filters or masks. And I do believe that exists, not within corporate, but there are spaces right now. There are conferences like the Hue Design Summit, which is absolutely beautiful. It's like Du Bois's dream of heaven, where there's so much melanin and you're in this big room and everybody's communing like family. It's awesome. And there are places like within Rare of the Black designers, there's a Black caucus where you can be full Black. And there's also places like Ethos Club online. So I'm really, really happy to see so many new places popping up where we can feel safe. Jacinda, what do you think?
I'm horribly biased. I have to agree with Maurice 112% because ultimately this is why I chose entrepreneurship, because the concept of safe spaces in corporate places, it's like a dual mixed type of thing, right? Like the very person who typically is over the company, do they really want it do they really want it safe? Like, do they really? I don't know. I mean, it's not been the experience that I've had. And so in understanding that unless I create the space, then it's probably not the safe how I would define safe. So if I need it to be safe, for me, it was about making it myself and determining what was going to be in it and who was going to be in it and why it was going to be happening, and not being held back or held down by some other person's vision who was never really mine. And I was only reliant upon them to give me this piddly 2-week check. So for me, I just took all of that off the table and I just started my own business where I know the space is safe.
And actually just like really, really fast being back in on that. I think even the need for ERGs to create a safe space within a company kind of shows that the company itself is not a safe space.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so it's like you have all these affinity groups that are supposed to provide, like, whenever someone will come up to me like, oh, you should come to our company, whatever else, they'll work hard, they'll like pimp the the ERGs like crazy. And it's like, well, are you telling me that I'm not going to get what I need from your team? Is that what you're telling me? It's like I'm going to have to go elsewhere, invest my other time again, which is not probably going to be like compensated for. It's going to be like outside of the workday in order for me to be fulfilled and feel safe in this area.
And ultimately, I love that, Bekah. It's like, so you want me to join the ERG because it's not safe here, and it's a culture problem here, and it can be a little challenging. So we're supposed to like fellowship to bond together against the man. Like, I don't know. That's why I chose Omari. That's why I chose entrepreneurship. It was just a much better route for me. And I'm a seasoned designer, right? Like I've played the game already a couple times, maybe a few times. I played the game and I'm just not up for it anymore. And so I think it's important to have it's important to be in the space to recognize, ooh, this ain't it, but don't stay. You know what I'm saying? Like when you recognize it, don't stay, or at least figure out where you can be at that is safe, because that's ultimately what you should be striving for in your career, is safe.
I appreciate you guys for sharing those perspectives. I think you guys all provided great and awesome insights. The next question I have is somewhat related. Each of you have had your past experiences with other design organizations prior to establishing your own. what were some of the experiences you had with those organizations? And then what was your motivation to starting your own collective design group?
I'll start with that one. I've always jokingly referred to a lot of the other organizations as the White Student Union. And it has always been my job to start the Black Student Union. There was never a doubt. It was just, I saw that there was a need. And since college, I was like, you know what? I've got to start this. It's my job. And it wasn't easy because reaching out to other African Americans, they weren't always receptive. And the honest truth about those national organizations is I've actually never had a problem at all, but I've always kept them at arm's length because so I primarily grew up in an all-white neighborhood. I went to a predominantly white high school, predominantly white church, predominantly white college, and I live in Austin. So I'm very familiar with the ways of white people. It's no big deal for me to walk into a room full of white people, and some of my best friends are white. So we always have these conversations about race that are like really intense, but we also find ways to resolve them. And they would ask me questions like, how would you feel if I started a white student union? Because you're the Black student union, it's not fair to. And I was like, you know what, since you're so concerned about race, you really should start a white student union and you should be the president. And then part of that goal should be to celebrate your heritage, to celebrate your heroes, to celebrate your failures, to celebrate the horrors. And then you bring your full whiteness and I'll bring my full whiteness, and then we'll work on problems on the campus together. So I've always seen those organizations as a place that were open, but not really for me. So it was just always my job to do something like this, and it has been full of rewards. I'm also having my Malcolm after Mecca moment where I'm kind of like changing and being a little bit more open and giving a little bit more of my time. And I'm seeing that there are a lot of common struggles because there's this superordinate identity of being a designer that we can all cling to. But I'm going to digress because I would love to hear from other people on this panel. Maurice, I've been a fan of yours since the Black Weblog Awards. So I'd love to hear why you started this space.
Oh, okay. Where to begin? So my interactions with design organizations have been kind of shaky, I think, at best. You kind of never really know where you're coming in terms of how the work that you're doing is going to be perceived by them either as a deficit that they're not able to do or something that they want to bring in to kind of make themselves look better. I had the privilege of serving on AIGA's National Diversity and Inclusion Task Force for a number of years. And even within the confines of doing that at the national level, there were still so many restrictions and things that couldn't be done, that we couldn't do, all of us on the task force being people of color, because the white person who was the strategic director or whomever that was over the task force was sort of the gatekeeper that wouldn't allow certain things to happen. So it sort of ended up becoming this weird kind of game of telephone where the task force would do something and then it gets filtered through them and then it goes up to headquarters and it's Purple Monkey dishwasher attached to it. Like there's other stuff that has to go with it. And so having that kind of like weird like gate between you trying to do the work and them trying to look good ends up being a bit of a problem. I should say I'm no longer a part of the AIGA task force. I'm actually no longer even an AIGA member. However, I still do, kind of keep in contact with them and with the organization and with people at different chapters, because I realize that as designers, we have, common goals to solve problems. I don't think that the organization, at least that particular organization, given its age, it is over 100 years old, is going to change anytime soon. I think it is too bound by tradition and probably shackled a little bit by corporate fealty. I mean, you don't really want to piss off the people that could write you checks that can keep your organization in order. So there's a certain kind of level that you have to keep. And oftentimes Black people are under that level.
I'm sorry, I felt like that needed a pause as well. Bekah, did you want to add to that as well?
I mean, they said so much of it. I was just so used to being the only one in my space, whether that was the only Black chick at a design event, whether that's AIGA or whatever else, or honestly, even within these internal ERGs, the only designer in those spaces. And so it's like, Blackness is a great thing for us to come around and, really talk about, but like Black design is like a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother industry. I just remember going and trying to really be involved in this ERG and even said like, oh yeah, I'm a designer, and be like, oh, like they just like didn't connect. And so for me, it was like even having that combination of like, what have I chosen to do with my life, and what is my identity that needed to come together. But as far as design organizations, I mean, there have been situations where I've been asked to be on a panel and then found it the day before the panel that they decided to replace me with a different Black girl with a bigger title. And, there is a lot of, different spaces where it's the performative efforts that are causing some of, that essentially just like perpetuate this white supremacy in these organizations. And that by itself just kind of causes like, everything to go wrong. Because, if they're basically checking a box and saying, all right, we have one black person on this panel at the historically Black, center, which they actually only realized like, a few weeks before the event. It really shows kind of where the priorities are and what they're actually doing to fix it. Because if they're ready to check a box, they're not actually, prepared or willing to create actual spaces for people to congregate and really have like safety with their identity.
Thank you again. I think that's another set of really solid points. The next question I want to ask is, what are the benefits that you guys find for designers of color within the respective groups that you've each created?
I actually, I would love to take the first part of that answer. Because of the work that I do, I learned long ago, that legacy is really ultimately where I have to put my energy in, right? And, I don't have any children. And so for me, it's always about how are we setting up and what are we setting up for this next generation? Like, where will they go? Who will they call? How will they be received? Will they hear things like, oh my gosh, you speak so well for a Black girl? Like, will they have to hear, those types of things? And so I started Design Explorer because I came to a place where I really saw the inside of how organizations operate and how the people who manage and navigate these organizations really, really think, and really what their view is on commitment, being committed to diversity and inclusion. And I knew they didn't have our young people in mind. I knew they did not have plans and things created. I knew they did not have intentions proper to network, to nurture, to help them navigate, to help them move forward, to open doors, to be door openers. Like, I knew they didn't have those. And that's what I am building Design Explorer to do, right? This summer, I was super excited. I was able to place 4 young people into jobs, right? Like, off of calls, off of a network, off of being able to speak to someone and to advocate for another person other than yourself. And so when I think about what are the benefits, it can look glossy, but my mama used to always say, all that glitters is not gold. And so I think having small organizations like Design Explorer, like AAGD, right, like Revision Pass, I think ultimately we will be the ones who make those decisions and prove to our young people where the true benefits are.
Absolutely. I know one of the benefits, it may not be feeling so safe, actually. We will give you honest critique. Mm-hmm. And if you throw something into our group that's like full of glitter or something like that, we're gonna tell you to get that shit out of here. And it's not because we think you're whack. It's not because we think you're Black, it's because your work is not meeting the standards that it needs to meet. So you can't have that as an excuse. And then we're not afraid to talk to them directly, because we don't have that barrier of race to worry about.
I think beyond that, so when I started my community, Black Designers of Seattle, it was kind of really founded, or I try to come to it from a point of vulnerability and authenticity. So a lot of like what we've done so far, like there has been the skill sharing, but more like a mentoring level. But I think it's been more about just like these community like discussions that we've been able to have just like as a family, as like a house. And there's housekeeping to do in some ways, because even as a community we have things like colorism, we have we all have different backgrounds, and so our identity is also not like one being. There is not one Black experience. And so being able to have these discussions and have a safe place where people feel welcome, it's like, I am a light and bright Black girl. And so there is some space, and from California, who camps? And so there are some spaces where I can go in and people are like, oh, it's a Black girl who camps or something. And so, being able to bring their full self into the space has been something that both I have felt just very fulfilled by, and then also have heard that is something that is more unique than than other spaces that they may have gone into.
Oh, didn't realize I was on mute, but thank you so much. One thing I realized I didn't do a good job of when introducing you guys was actually addressing the organizations that you guys have and how people can actually support them. So I actually want to give you guys each a quick opportunity to mention the name of the organization and how people can actually support them.
All right, I'll start off. My podcast is Revision Path. That's at revisionpath.com. We're also on Twitter and on Instagram. It's a podcast, new episodes every Monday morning. Find it wherever you find your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Also with Revision Path, there are two kind of separate projects which are underneath that. The first is 28 Days of the Web, which highlights a different Black designer and developer for every day during Black History Month. And then we also have Recognize, which is our literary anthology made up of Indigenous designers and people of color, which are kind of the next generation of design voices. And the best way really to support it is, for Revision Path, of course, is to listen. If anyone would like to donate and sponsor, that's always great too. But really the best way is to just kind of spread the word about Revision Path, listen, give us feedbacks, that's the best way.
And I'll go next. Unity at AAGD or unity.aagd.co. That's the membership site. You can stop by. We also have a group on Facebook, and we are doing movie night next week. So it'll be good to see y'all. But yeah, the chat is pretty lit.
I'm over on the West Coast with Black Designers of Seattle, but I feel with the remote world, it's been sprinkling very much in other spaces. We have a LinkedIn, Facebook, and we just started a Slack channel. And starting in October, we'll also be doing Black Summit. So Designing While Black kind of events where we're actually just gonna be sharing our skills with each other, and also recording those so that we can start to really train and bring up others in the community.
Mm-hmm. I have an organization. We are a social enterprise named Design Explorer. I started it after the 3.5-year research project that I did analyzing the lack of diversity in design, where I found that though there are tons of people interested in looking at the lack of diversity in design, there were no for-profit full-time businesses working to solve the problem. So everything that we do works to change the face of the design profession. We do this through corporate organizations where we do research projects for them. We do design work, design strategy pieces, design research projects, but our heart and my soul is in our youth activities where we go into underserved schools, communities, organizations. I even went into a church once and did a design challenge. And we work to expose the next generation of young people to design. Right now, we're super, super excited because even though we're in this incredible time of this pandemic, we were able to use our Think Like a Designer workshop series, and where it was social distancing, and we created creativity kits for young people to take home and be able to do these types of activities at home so they could learn to think like a designer and have the tools readily accessible to them. So anybody who's interested in purchasing one of my creativity kits or subscribing to be one of the young people in our Design Explorers Design Club, you can check me out on designexplorer.com. And we spell Design Explorer real gangster with 2 R's.
I want to thank you guys for the work that you guys actually do. Being honest to the point, I mean, to the points that you guys brought up in terms of safe spaces, the fact that you guys are actually doing the work and doing the hard labor on the ground, actually creating safe spaces for people of color. They're attempting to jump into a field that doesn't have many people that look like them is extremely important. And I support you guys at every step of the way, and I love the work that you guys do and hope that others find value in it as well. So I just wanted to make sure I gave you guys that respect and shared my appreciation for all the stuff that you guys have done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. So we still have a couple quick minutes before our next panel. Let me. I'm not gonna throw a surprise out there. So I want to thank you guys again, though, and again, respect to you guys and hats off. I'm gonna get ready to jump into our next panel. So our panel, our academia panel, will discuss the history of design, anti-racism in the classroom, as well as recommend racially inclusive changes to pedagogical practice. On this panel, we have Teresa Moses, pronouns she and her, assistant professor of graphic design and director of design justice at the University of Minnesota. We have Jennifer White Johnson, pronouns she, her, they, them. My apologies, assistant professor of visual communication design, disability advocate at Bowie State University. We have Dr. Leslie Ann Noel, pronouns she, her, associate director of design thinking for social impact. And we also have Angela Baines, pronouns she, her, assistant professor, faculty of design at OCAD University in Toronto, Canada. I'd like to welcome you all.
Thanks, Amari.
Thank you.
All right, so the first question I'm going to ask, given the historically racist and colonized design history that is traditionally taught in design pedagogy, what are some of the ways that you have overcome the hegemony of design? And what do we need to truly see change, not only in the classes you teach, in the classes we teach, but in the institutions that we teach at?
I'm gonna jump in and maybe not answer the question, but I'm gonna try to answer it, and then I'm gonna start saying that I don't teach to the canon because, I mean, fortunately I don't teach graphic design or industrial design anymore, and it means that I have a little bit more freedom with what I'm teaching. But I think that very often that design canon is exclusive. You know, it was written for a particular group. It was written in a way that it excludes a lot of people. And really, I focus more on process and reflexivity and collaboration and creating your own design path, rather than teaching that, okay, this person is who we need to put up on a pedestal and this is what is good design. I'm always challenging that, you know, what is good design? You know, and like in my own work, I'm not trying to seek validation anymore. I'm kind of done with the gaslighting and the, you know, my own imposter syndrome or having to prove myself excessively. And I'm just doing what I know needs to be done. That's where I am these days.
I forgot to introduce Larry as well. Larry, I apologize. Larry King, pronouns he, him, former assistant professor of design and creative director of Glyphic Studio at Kent State University. Larry was also a committee member on my thesis when I was graduating from my MFA program at Kent State University. So please forgive me and don't beat me up later for forgetting to. But Angela, did you want to add to that first question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
we have to be careful that we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. I think when we talk about hegemony, I don't think we actually do overcome it, because it is actually part of who we are. We've had to grow up in this society. But I do think what we do is we absorb it. And so we absorb it and it becomes part of our lived experience, essentially. And for us, I think, because of that, we have a natural empathy. And I think it was Erwin who mentioned that earlier on. We have a natural empathy because of that. We have an understanding. There's a type of questioning that we bring forth as well. And we end up just weaving that into how we express ourselves. And in doing that, we then have our own design aesthetic. So although the platform or the foundation is very Eurocentric, sometimes you need those foundations because there are no other building blocks to then set your design upon. But it doesn't mean that what we produce has to look that way. And for me, it's all about bringing your uniqueness, expressing who we are, what we want to be, and also what we want to become. Because at the end of the day, that's how we're going to bring this new richness. And did you have a second part to that question? I don't remember. Was there a second part to that question?
Yes, the second part of the question are, what do we need to truly see change, not only in the classroom?
Oh, right, okay. Well, that really comes down to leadership. That's the only way. At OCAD University, we are setting about decolonizing the curriculum. And Dean Doris Tunstall, I'm going to give her a shout out. And also, I'm going to big up Lillian Allen, who is a professor at OCAD, originally from Jamaica, educated in North America. She fought for years for a more diverse faculty. And now it's actually happening. And so what basically happens there is we've got what we call a cluster hire. So just hiring one Black professor or one BIPOC professor is not going to make the change. So we have to look at this cluster, because it really comes down to, what would you just call it? You call it critical mass, right? So if you have that critical mass, you can actually make the impact. And I noticed that after we had our Black cluster hire, of which I was part of that, so I'm very honored. I think it was the Rhode Island School of Design has just hired 10 Black designers as well. So if you have that critical mass, you can actually move forward. And then I would say in the classroom, and if there are any white professors listening, which I'm sure there are hundreds, it really starts off with some very basic things that you can actually do. It's not rocket science, right? It just takes some doing and action. Is, do a little bit of research on Black designers. Google is there for everybody. Look for, Google Black artists. Instagram, was it African digital art? Instagram, Afrotopia. So you can get this information. It's the willingness. Are you willing to do that, to make that change? Even revision path. So I'm gonna give a shout out to Maurice, an excellent podcast which you could play or you can set as a something that your students can do. But also educating the institution as well. And I'll say one other thing so you guys can get a sense of where I'm coming from. So I grew up in the UK, I was born there. And in England, we were taught that Black people had no writing systems. Okay, well, that's what we were taught in school. And I remember sitting in that classroom thinking, well, that can't be right. That can't be right. So I went home and I told my dad, and I'm like, oh, like this is what they've said at school. And in the truly Jamaican way, it says, make them go on, man. I'll lie them I tell, right? So it was like, no, okay, so my dad has said it's a lie, so it is a lie, right? And so for me, it's like I'm seeking out, African typography. You know, it's beautiful. If you haven't kind of delved into that, it's fantastic. And bringing those kind of things to the classroom. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I want to add, okay, yes, I said I don't teach the canon. And I want to add a little bit of like theoretical grounding then to it, my not teaching to the canon. Because I'm not teaching like aesthetics and, you know, I'm really teaching about process. You know, I'm in community engaged design. I am grounding a lot of what I'm doing now in decolonial literature, and also trying to get people to really think about their positionality. And, you know, we talk about race all the time. And, you know, like I did a focus group with Black students at one point, and I really felt, and this is something that I think maybe a lot of other professors would feel. Sometimes there's a guilt that we also feel as Black professors, you know, after I did this focus group. And I felt that as a Black professor, I had been feeling them because maybe I wasn't making my class, if I'm teaching the same thing that everybody else is teaching, you know, some of these classes are not friendly to Black students, you know, and now if we're thinking of change, that's one of the things that I'm thinking about, you know, how do I make my class accountable to Black students, or we have Black community partners, you know, how do I make the work that we are doing really be able to stand up to what the demands of the BIPOC community are, you know, how are we making work that serves our community well, which might then be like a different kind of conversation that we're having in the design class. You know, we are talking, like I said, about race all of the time, and maybe a little bit too much for some people, but I think, you know, if people see race and have the skills to talk about it, then I, as a professor, think that I've done my part.
Thank you, guys. I think you guys put up some amazing points. The next question I have is, being a Black professor at a predominantly white institution it can be increasingly uncomfortable given the weight of cultural taxation that you experience in comparison to your white colleagues. Could you guys speak to that experience and what it may be like for a student of color at a predominantly white institution as far as cultural taxation and that discomfort is concerned?
So I think on two levels, you know, as a professor, you know, I just mentioned the guilt that I was made to feel, or that I felt, not that I was made to feel, where on more than one occasion, I have had to think, okay, am I doing enough for Black students? And I don't know if I don't know if white professors are thinking about that. Are they doing enough for white students? And so it means then, you know, as a professional, at a predominantly white institution, I'm dealing then with some kinds of microaggressions that may be unintentional, but, you know, like I was in a conversation recently where I had to kind of casually drop things like, okay, yes, and I have a PhD in design, and I teach at Stanford and NC State and Tulane, and you mean this is not enough information? You know, so sometimes we're dealing with those levels of microaggressions, as well as having to think about how we are supporting, you know, I think that my service level, or what is expected of me, is huge. You know, I was mentoring students all summer because students see a professor who looks like them and reach out. And of course, I want to support them, but I think that there's that kind of very big workload for Black professors. And I don't know if there are really the support systems that exist, or even the recognition or acknowledgement of the amount of work that we do. And I'll stop there for a bit.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm going to jump in here. So for me, I think I was the only Black person hired in the area of graphic design where I previously taught for 4 years. And then I'm coming into a new university where I'm still the only Black faculty member in graphic design. And so, I don't think I ever conquer, or there's no like secret recipe to conquer the feeling of feeling like an other or feeling uncomfortable. Just like Les, you just mentioned, the microaggressions alone like just make you not want to show up to work. And because of that, anytime I see a Black student or a Black employee at my institution, I make sure like I run and grab like their information and let them know like, hey, I'm here, you're here. Like, can we, set up some time to like have, space, right? And that's a symptom of racism, like that scarcity, that we even exist and we can exist in those institutions is like completely wrong, right? To me personally, when I think about that, I think about how our institutions are really kind of going at diversity, equity, and inclusion work backwards. Like, I feel like, this fight for equity, this diversity, and this representation that they're wanting, rather than focusing on the Black people that are already there and existing in their institutions, they're like, let's just get like more people into a more like dangerous environment. And like, they think that's really gonna like help. And, my thought is like, as a Black culture, like we talk, so like if the place is good and we feel like we belong and we have a voice and we don't have to constantly prove our credentials to people, like we're going to tell other people, and Black people are going to try and get into those same spaces. So like, I feel like that whole conversation, like about this whole like diversity and we need more representation, that's going to make it better. That's not what's going to make it better. And you like, again, I feel like you never get over that. And sometimes when I hear them talking about like, how we can, help solve these problems, I hear things like, it starts with the next generation. We need to get to the K through 12 schools and all of that. And while yes, that needs to be happening simultaneously, it's almost like I feel like I'm erased and my experience is erased because I'm not in that K through 12 generation, and yet they're not like trying to fix any of the systemically racist, policies and practices that are happening every day in those institutions. So, it's like they're forgetting the folks who are already here, who continue to suffer every day in these systems due to the culture of white supremacy that is so prevalent within our institutions. And then let's not forget like the cultural taxation of being like the trainer or the racist problem solver solely due to the fact that you're Black. And even in the classroom as a Black student, you're oftentimes called upon to talk about Blackness and teach your white colleagues or your white counterparts about racism and anti-Blackness, and that isn't right either. Those are all symptoms of racism. And if we had a true culture where like I, as a Black professor, am not the only one in my program talking about racism, it would be much easier for us to be able to move forward.
I like that.
I could just add to that. I come from a very similar situation. I've taught for 12 years, and at both of those institutions, I was the only Black faculty member. And I found myself trying to connect to these 1 or 2 Black students I'd find every now and then, which, is probably good, but I also feel a little bit awkward because I'm giving them a lot of extra attention because it's like, oh my God, you're here. So I definitely felt that there was a distinction between what I wanted to be feeling and then the work I was trying to do at the same time, making this space more inclusive and also trying to be, it's a lot, it really is. And you don't even recognize that it's a lot sometimes until it's much later when you've given a lot of that energy for years and years. And you're just like, yeah, there's just something that's a little off. My colleagues weren't necessarily direct about acknowledging those differences or making sure that I was trying to be that representation or whatever. But when you're the only one and the staff is, or the faculty is, 10 to 15 people, who else is going to do it? And yeah, it's a difficult crux to be in.
And you have this extra workload that is not actually going to be evaluated. And I think to me, that's the challenge, because actually the institution needs you to do that extra work. But then you need to be recognized and rewarded for it. You know, if you are in a tenure track position, nobody afterwards is supposed to say, oh, well, you were doing the wrong, you were focusing on the wrong thing. You were focusing on the right thing, but it wasn't being evaluated.
That right there. So jumping to the next question, universities are attempting to push diversity and inclusion as a means to solve the racial divide. This performative allyship can harm the state of Black design and education. What do you see are some of the issues with approaches, whether with your institution or other institutions, and what can we do to be better in addressing this issue?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. So not only am I an assistant professor of graphic design, but I'm the new director of design justice at the University of Minnesota. And one of the things that I find, probably one of the most frustrating things I find within the academic world is the use of language. I feel like there is an almost toxic relationship with language in academia. Like language can be weaponized against folks without power. It's like part of this political bureaucracy that like stops policy from being passed, or, you know, folks claim tradition in language, like as a means to like say, oh, I'm not gonna identify someone in the way they wanna be identified because this is how we're supposed to do it, right? And so I feel like the relationship with language is used as a performative tool as well. So I feel like language overall is like, can be harmful. I think it's used to publicize that an institution stands for something that in action, it actually does not. Like the land acknowledgements or the diversity statements that like people are throwing in their syllabus, but don't actually do anything within their class to emphasize those things. And so those statements, that language is never supported by real action and accountability. I feel like those claims are almost, the language used in those claims is almost as, more harmful than the actual racism within our institutions, because it perpetuates the idea that we are something that we are not and that there's no need for change. So we'd rather say we're striving for diversity than say we have a foundation and a core of white supremacy within our institution. I think the uncovering of those truths is uncomfortable, it hurts, but that is necessary for real change. And I said in an apartment meeting just today that I feel like white folks are more afraid of being called racist than Black people who are dying at the hands of systemic racism. And that fear, you know, that I'm gonna say something offensive so I don't even wanna do anything, that stops people and our institutions and our communities from actually moving forward and actually doing something that's going to bring healing and liberation to our communities. So the thing I find most interesting about all of this is that as an institution of higher education, we should be at the forefront of innovative and creative ways to approach racialized design, abolishing the systems of oppression, reimagining new design approaches that challenge our institutions to move forward toward not just equity, but liberation for Black lives.
That was beautiful, Terry. I know I'm supposed to add something to this, but honestly, you've said so many impactful things. I have some experience in this, having served on my universities or my colleges design. No, sorry, it's the diversity and equity and inclusion team something. It went through a few different names over the years. And the goal of that organization was to infuse our college with opportunities for education, assistance, for this broadly defined group of diverse people. So we were looking at the LGBTQ community, people of color, we're looking at veterans, people with disabilities, and so forth. And so we did a lot of wonderful things through that group by making things accessible to people. We had a program where students could have their fees for a passport waived if they wanted to travel abroad and study, and that was a barrier for them, which it oftentimes is for people of color and so forth. So we did some really wonderful things through that group, but a lot of what we did was sort of based in academia, which isn't always attractive to the people we're trying to include and communicate with. Again, you pair that with the dearth of representation on such a team, even though we actually managed to get a bit more than we normally would have at that college. And it just sort of feels like a committee that sits around and talks about why aren't there more Black people? Why aren't there more gay people and so forth? When really we should be asking the questions that Terry just mentioned.
So I enjoyed being on those committees, and I enjoyed the work that we did do and the impact that we had. But ultimately, we were limited, just like what was being said earlier about the safe spaces and so forth. We can only go so far up the chain before it's, you know, it's like, okay, y'all had your fun. We got the recognition from the outside world that we need. Now calm down, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and if I can chime in, you know, just the whole conversation of, you know, being Black and disabled, and making sure that students, you know, in the time of COVID, like professors making sure that they are just empathetic, creating virtual safe spaces. Like, what do those spaces look like? You know, making sure that those students who were begging for accessibility needs and begging for accommodations, you know, being Black and disabled, like they have so much already stacked up against them. And so making sure that the virtual space is a space where they feel, okay, like I'm heard, this is like an experimental way of learning for me, or maybe they would have preferred learning that way to begin with because it's just a little bit more, you know, it's one-on-one. We can do like virtual appointments, and maybe sometimes the classrooms themselves were these like oppressive spaces where they felt like they were competing with so many folks just to get a word in. So I think that, you know, we can't talk about diversity and inclusion if we're not talking about the students who need those accommodations, the students who have been fighting for those accommodations, who don't even have spaces to assemble on campus because of, you know, of the way that the spaces are just designed. You know, they're not really meant for those particular voices. You know, students who have learning disabilities, students who are autistic, who feel like I can't even get a word in because, you know, I don't necessarily feel like I'm worthy of being seen. Like I feel disposable. So I think we just need to continue to just make sure that those students are uplifted, and that they feel like that they have the accommodations.
Thank you. Now more than ever, it's necessary for Black voices to be at the table, as we mentioned in our first and second panel. How do we get more Black voices and talent into design education, both in the classroom and both from, you know, the faculty standpoint? How do you guys see that? What do you guys think we should do to kind of better diversify our classrooms?
Well, I could jump in here. I think my microphone is on. Yes, I can jump in here. I can only speak for OCAD University, of course. So part of our mandate as being part of that Black Cluster Hire is to actually get out into the community. And I think it was Erwin, I think earlier on, or it may have been Sam, I think, talked about, you know, untraditional routes into design education. But also, there's some projects that Dean Dorey has spearheaded primarily for Black youth. And one of those is the blackocad.ca, and it's the Black Youth Design Initiative. And so going into the community, which is what we have to do, and something I love doing as well, and having these programs, introducing kids to design, to let them play and let them express themselves. There's summer initiatives that we have. There's a portfolio course that we have for Black students as well, if they want to get into higher education, where they can work with mentors. There's an entrepreneurship program for Black youth. So I think it really starts, you know, from that ground up. And I think, Teresa, you said that, I'm just trying to think back to the point that you made, that it's all about, oh, it's the next generation. And if you think about it, we were the next generation, right? And here we are today in the 21st century talking about the same thing. But it's not just going to happen in the classroom. Like, it has to be brought out into the community as well. And if you're going to bring them into the institution, then that institution has to be safe. So it sort of comes back to what we were talking about before. So it's not a point of us going out into the community saying, hey, you know, doing graphic design is so cool and it's great and let's express yourself. And then we put them into these institutions and they experience something that, you know, we don't want them to experience, which is a negative episode in their life. But at OCAD, we really are trying to make the space itself safe. We've heard from our Black students. We know what the problems are, and with the critical mass that we have, we can push for that change and make those safe places and safe spaces for our students.
Yeah, and if I can chime in, are we still on that question? Is that the last question in our panel? Okay, so, and thank you for that, Angela. And so just kind of from where you were coming from in terms of like safe spaces, so safe as in spaces that like where students who are different, who have various identities, especially students who are disabled, do they feel like that they can come as their true authentic selves? And that's something that I've heard so much tonight, and that I just love that it's been a part of everyone's vernacular. Coming as their true authentic selves in terms of not masking and feeling like, if I have a disability, am I gonna be forced to conform as like a Black or BIPOC disabled student? As a Black, you know, BIPOC disabled professor, like, will I feel like I have to conform or mask on my campus to just be respected among the students and even among like the other faculty? So I feel like, you know, as we continue having these conversations like about authenticity and about making sure we feel safe is like, but if I was born a specific way, or if I acquired a disability late in life, is that going to shift the way that I appear, the way that I can be amplified, like just in society in general, knowing that the curriculum, knowing that the courses, knowing that the way that they feel on campus is always being used against them, or being used as, or just being used as a space where they don't necessarily feel advocated for. Because, you know, how many of you have students in your class that need consistent accommodations and can say that you're familiar with that process and what it takes to get, you know, what the accommodation process is like, and if they feel like they can come to you specifically to feel uplifted and amplified, not just from you, but just from like their classroom in general, from like the students that they engage with on a consistent basis. Because if it's not necessarily starting with their art education, if we're not inspiring them to be authentic, to be vulnerable with the way that they even approach their projects, then we're pretty much like just setting them up for like the systemic aspect of just of compliance, you know? So that's just like a huge issue. And I feel like we don't really talk about it enough. Professors don't even talk about it enough. We spend a lot of time not necessarily wanting to feel like we have our own disabilities, and we necessarily can't share that with our students. And it's just going to continue to be a very oppressive space if we're talking about diversifying the workforce. But we have to, you know, we have to get rid of that inward oppression, where we can't even really be like us, you know, our true selves.
I could jump in here again, and I want to echo what Jacinda said earlier on about just doing it yourself. So I also have my own design company, and I've been working for myself for the past 30 years, having my own company. And again, I think it may have been Sam talked about different routes of getting into the design industry. Well, we don't actually all have to go to college. You know, I had a Black youth training program in my company, brought in designers. Some of these kids didn't even graduate high school. They would never get into those institutions, but bringing them in and training them and teaching them, it gives them a route into the industry. And so I think the other part of it is, do we have to go through these channels? I've also trained ex-female convicts in graphic design, right? And they've gone on to change their life and get into the design industry. Would they be able to do that you know, and get to college and do that in a normal route? No. So I agree with Jacinda, and I'm going to have to talk to her after the panel discussion is over.
Larry, would you like to add on to that too?
Yes, I definitely, I wanted to touch on the point that Jennifer made about being yourself, because I feel that a lot of what I do, even in the classroom, but certainly outside of it, is encouraging the students to just seek out exactly what the thing is that will make them happy. And if that's through design or through being creative in some way, that there can be a path for them, because I like to think of myself as proof that that's possible. I'm a first generation college student, first generation, a lot of stuff, because I just sort of sought out those opportunities because I don't know why, but I try to use myself as an example for those sorts of successes. And more important than it is for them to be students of mine in graphic design or be at this university, it's important for them to be successful Black people who don't have their dreams crushed by the weight of our history. And so a lot of times what I'm doing as an instructor, or what I was doing as an instructor, is fielding students into, or funneling them into where they belong that might not even be with me as their instructor. But I think that we have to give students the space to explore their options that doesn't always depend on college and university experience, because we all know that that's a costly barrier for a lot of people. My university or my college requires that a student who comes in has a brand new computer so that they can do the work that we do. That makes sense for a white person who has a history with family who's gone to college, that sort of thing. For me, I remember thinking a computer is the farthest thing from possible for me. And so that would have instantly been a barrier for someone like me if I hadn't had help, from people in the community and so forth. That diversity isn't going to just happen when we invite people in, because we have to show them a version of success that could happen based on their circumstances. So that's been my personal goal, I think.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I feel like I feel like I'm just learning from listening to you and knowing that I can just be me, and that's just the goal, is just something that I dropped in the chat, and I've been taking notes as we've been talking, is just letting students know that their lived experiences and identities can embolden their creative thinking and process, that their lived experience, just like you were saying, their true identities can really help set the tone for just feeling like they can just exist as their true authentic selves, and that there's power and that there's resistance in that existence. I know that's kind of corny, but just making sure that but we have to set that tone, and I'm glad that everybody is in alignment with that. And I just want to see more. I just want to see more amplification of differences. Difference is in the way that we live, in the way that we were born with. I just want to continue to see that. So, yeah.
As a young Black academic, I agree with the idea that there are not many of us, and also want to take the time to acknowledge the inspiration and motivation that I get from seeing, professors such as yourselves in our private discussions, both about the private work and research that you guys do, as well as my experiences with some of you, Larry, in a physical classroom setting. I've gleaned a lot. Jennifer, definitely from your passion and the advocacy that you do for the disabled populace. Terry, the work that you do with Blackbird Revolt, and Angela, the breadth of work that you do, and the talks that you've had, I've taken a lot from. And Larry, the assistance that you provided me as an aspiring professor during my time at Kent, as well as some of the other faculty members there. So as a young faculty member who looks up to you guys in a lot of different ways, I again want to thank you guys for taking the time to be on this panel and acknowledge the work that you guys have done, because without people like you going out there and doing the work that you do, I probably wouldn't be a professor myself.
Omari, if I could just say real quick, I absolutely appreciate what you've just said. And I want to say to you that you sort of got me started on this whole journey of looking deeper at the racial divide that has always been around me, because you came to me with your questions for your thesis, and you just, I'm hopeful that I was helpful to you, but honestly, you started me thinking about a lot of things. And so to be part of this right now that's all on you. And I think that what you're doing is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
And Larry, I think I'm going to tag on to what you just said and say, well, Omari also does a little bit of reverse mentorship where I am very inspired by, you know, like what Omari has written, and then that he would take on this huge project and just bring it off. We had how many ever thousands of people registered. So, you know, you're also pretty inspiring to all of us.
No, I appreciate it. I'm still trying to get my schedule muscle to match yours. Like I still don't know how you squeeze all the projects that you do, Leslie, into like one thing, but you guys, I think you guys are awesome. And I thank you again. I'm gonna jump into the next panel, Design as Activism. So with this panel, we are going to conclude, but this panel is going to discuss the recent uprising since the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and many others. This panel will discuss the roots of protests in the field of design and how designers of color have used their creative ability to advocate for safety, equity, and liberation. So with my honor, I will introduce again Teresa Moses, pronouns she and her, creative director at Blackbird Revolts. Jordan Moses, pronouns he, him, visionary director at Blackbird Revolts. Lauren Williams, pronouns she, her, designer, researcher, organizer. And Antoinette Carroll, pronouns she, her, founder, president, and CEO at Creative Reaction Lab, and co-founder and co-director at And Design, sorry. All right. So the very first question I would like to ask, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement and recent uprisings since the murder of George Floyd, what opportunities have presented themselves, good and bad, for designers of color, and what kind of opportunities does this present to Black designers?
So I'm happy to jump in. Thanks again for having me, Omari.
Of course.
So I think one thing that I've noticed is that it feels like an opportunity that's clearly presented itself to folks, whether Black, people of color, Indigenous, or not, who do design work, is these moments or attempts to kind of acknowledge or contribute to the movement in ways that are designed or design interventions. So I'm talking about like Black Lives Matter murals that have cropped up in many cities. Some of this is extended to other kind of actions that take over space or use art and design to kind of signal solidarity or allyship, social media campaigns, things like that, like the blackout that happened earlier in the summer. And I think for me, I think they're important. They are an important part of what's going on, but they're also completely inadequate and extremely performative in a way that I think sort of obscures the larger question that's at hand when people are making demands, at least in this particular moment, when the demand is make Black Lives Matter, which requires in that demand to do things like defund police, treat people differently, fundamentally change the way that we regard Black life. And so for me, it's become really present that seems to be an opportunity that folks have taken advantage of in many, many, many cities across the country right now. But I'm more interested instead, I live in Detroit, and I think, you know, in these basic ways that designers can be involved in making demands that would make Black Lives Matter, like turning water on instead of off in the middle of a pandemic, for example, which is something that's still happening in Detroit, or ending evictions or putting moratoriums on evictions, which are still happening in the middle of the pandemic in cities like Detroit. So I'm interested in that. I think I'm interested in the potential of Black designers to kind of commit ourselves to organizing and being residents and neighbors and not bringing design to the conversation first, because I think we presume that it can solve a lot of problems that it really can't. So those are some of the things I'm interested in. I have a much longer list, but I'd love to hear what other folks have in mind.
So I'll jump in after you. Thank you for your insight, Lauren. So when I think about this question, I think I'm first like saddened by the fact that it takes the murder and killing of Black people to open doors for us. I think that, you know, in the world that we live in, that's, you know, founded on white supremacy, it takes white shame and guilt for access to resources for the Black community. And frankly, I'm angry about it, sad and angry. And with each moment that happens, each time, you know, someone is taken from us, from our community, I I hope that momentum will continue. And so while, you know, there is much heartbreak, there's new traumatizations there that develop for us, and there's so much more that we have to overcome. I think that you have to be just a little hopeful. And I think I'm hopeful because there are so many beautifully talented and creative Black folks whose work does need to be brought to the forefront. I think that this presents an opportunity for that beautiful and that creative work to truly center Black joy and liberation. You know, we're always been a resilient people, and I think that, you know, for that to come to the forefront is an opportunity in the midst of all of this chaos and all of the traumas that that are happening to us again. I think that we have an opportunity to create and design completely new systems that center all Black people, just emphasizing that point, Jennifer, from the last panel, all Black people, Black disabled people, Black queer people. It has the opportunity to do that, to imagine new ways of governance, to imagine new forms of education, to imagine new ways of food access, to imagine new ways of accessible structures, new forms of collective leadership. We have the ability to do that as designers. We don't have to come in there and say, hey, we're going to make a logo, but we can actually use design in the way that we think about things to be able to move some of those things forward. I think that now is the time for us to use our abilities as a resilient and creative people to bring those ideas to fruition. I totally agree with you, and I think we need to be organizers. I'm an organizer, I'm an activist. Black Revolt is here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so we're here, you know, and I think we already have the minds and the ability to do that. And I think we just need to do it. When we talk about representation, I said this at a talk that I gave at Antoinette's conference, you know, when I talk about representation, I want to just represent. I want representation by people who want to represent. So bringing in all of our true and full Blackness, now I think it presents a time where, you know, we're not going to be shunned for that, where we can actually do that and find support within our communities and our accomplices to be able to move things forward.
I also want to add to that, if I can, Amari, if you're fine with that.
Of course.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm excited to see everyone. I'm feeling love here today. And y'all are bringing me so much joy in a day that has been a lot, if I'm going to be fully transparent. You know, when I think about this question, one of the things I reflect on is that Black Lives Matter before it became a hashtag, and it's going to matter before after the media is gone. And I think there has been this tendency to try to only focus on what's happening right now in this moment, and also forgetting that there have been ancestors and people on the ground that have been doing this work in the creative field and not for decades, right? And for generations. And so when I think about what role design plays in this moment, one, we need to make sure that we are thinking about how we define design, which you all have, anyone that's ever heard me talk, you know, I'm always trying to blow out the definition of design because I've seen spaces where people say design can't change the world, which, excuse my language, is fucking bullshit, because design has created the world. Design literally was the invisible innovation before innovation became a word. You know, all systems have been by design, including our oppressive systems. And so our designers, which includes everyone here and everyone in the world, need to think about, how do I design beyond my ivory tower? How do I make sure that I am not centering my design as just a form of working within my computer, but also thinking about how am I becoming a system designer within my own community? And so I really want to push us to move beyond just what's happening in this moment. And I'm not going to shame people that's showing up now, because everyone has had that moment in their life where that was the pivotal piece for them. That was the catalyst for change. And so for the folks that are showing up because of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Tony McDade, you know, we welcome you, and don't just do this as a performative act, but make it your life journey. And if you are only here to do a poster campaign, this is not the work for you, because this work is hard, it is messy, and it is something that requires us to show up authentically as ourselves. And so if you are here to just put something on your resume or on your portfolio site, I'm gonna need you to go ahead and take that somewhere else. And so I just want to be very frank in this space in saying that design has always been powerful, but one of the things we need to really think about is that many folks on the other side, and I hate to put a line here, but many folks on the other side have thought about how to use design to uphold oppressive colonization system, white supremacy systems for decades. And so we need to think about how we're going to use design to actually build a space of equity and liberation and of joy and honestly of legacy.
Yeah. All right. So, all right. The weight. I appreciate all of you guys and that comment. I mean, and yeah. I'm sorry. I'm loving this. All right. So the weight to solve racism within our community has always been on the backs of Black people. How can we begin to shift the responsibility, and in what ways can design support this shift?
Yeah, I'll hop in here. So, I mean, the impacts of racism are quite real and obviously need to be dealt with. I mean, the lack of access, the opportunity, I mean, it's systemic, right? It's orchestrated. Antoinette was just saying they were designed. These things are designed, right? There's people on the other side figuring out how to design systems and design culture, design practices to subjugate people, to harm people, right? And, you know, we are often forced to carry or deal with the side effects of racism and the dehumanizing circumstances that we're faced with, right? These systems that we live within and under weren't set up for our health and well-being. They're not set up for the health and well-being of Black people, right? Their foundations are more often than not rooted in our subjugation. In my eyes, many of the systems, say for instance, police, are in direct conflict with Black health, Black safety, and joy, right? Many of these systems can't change or shift to accommodate our needs. So I don't really believe it's our responsibility to shift or change or reform these systems, especially when usually if you look at how Black folks throw their money and time and energy, and especially our votes, we're the ones consistently trying to stop the system from destroying all folks. And, you know, but I also believe that it is our job, and we're tasked with knowing how to navigate the systems, right, for survival. But it's our job to really spend our energy and leverage our brilliance to build something vastly different. Like, our job is not to carry the systems that exclude us. Our job is to build space, systems, communities that center the love, health, creativity, visions, and joy of Black peoples. That is our job, right? And I think design can support this by helping shape the visions and creating those realities, right? Antoinette saying this stuff is designed, so we design it, right? And if we're all designers, we design that future. We design the systems, the culture, the practices that we engage in, right? And that feed us and that heal us. And design and our language and our messaging and our communication can highlight what can be and what will be. So we can disseminate information, we can articulate ideas, and we can really share our visions through design.
So I will be very honest, this question brings up a major tension for me, because we did not create the system of racism. And I'm going to be very, very honest. I don't personally want a white person to come and tell me how they're going to fix the system that impacts me without centering my voice. You can't tell me what it's like to be a Black woman. You can't tell me what it's like to be a Black mother. You can't tell me what it's like to be a Black wife, and also have to look at the reality of the Black men in my family have died significantly early, including my 14-year-old brother from 2 years ago. You know, you cannot sit here and what I think, and this is the tension I'm having, is because, you know, you have individuals that will come in with this white savior complexity and say, I'm going to help, when many times it's them centering their ego and trying to be empathy, you know, warriors, opposed to actually looking at how have my biases, have my privileges, have my, you know, unseen areas actually continually created harm. And so there tends to be this movement of I want to help without actually helping with through a lens of accountability. And when I think about this, you know, actually us dismantling these systems of racism, which we know intersects with so many phobias and intersects with so many other isms, and many times we try to divide it as if it's this one bucket, like it doesn't intersect in all these other areas. You know, I do believe that it has to be a combination of both. You know, in my work, we talk about building a movement of redesigners for justice, and recognizing that we need folks that have the living expertise to be a part of the work, and as stated many times, be paid for their time, but then also the folks that have the power and privileges and be able to leverage those power and privileges on behalf of others. And in some cases, I'm not saying that Black folks don't have power and privileges in spaces, because again, when you look at the intersectionality, sometimes we do. And we really need to look at, when should I be centered and when should I maybe bring others along and provide them with the space and the safety and the ability to be brave, and also the ability to hold others accountable. But some of that is also having to look at the reality that we have drunk from the same faucet and narratives as everyone else. And two of the greatest tools that have been used is kind of upholding ignorance and upholding division. There has been intentionality of erasure of narratives of Black folks, and the intentionality of erasure of just our lack of racial consciousness, where many times it's hard for us to even step up and understand how these systems have been designed to affect us, because we're not even taught what they are. It took for me to learn later on in my life all these different things, such as school to confinement pipeline, that I was a product of, my family very much was a product of, for me to feel like that I actually can challenge the system. And so I do feel like I don't think it should be fully the responsibility of Black people to dismantle racism in entirety, because again, we didn't create it. And also don't exclude my voice and my power when it comes to actually getting rid of that system, because ultimately what's going to happen is that those individuals will then replace a system that ultimately benefits them. And again, I'm still in an oppressive state.
Thank you so much. One question I do want to ask that I didn't put on the list prior, but considering that this panel is about design as activism, and considering that you guys are each very active design activists, design citizens, I want to ask about the types of organizing that you guys are doing and the advice that you would give to other people who are looking to organize in their own cities. Terry and Jordan, I know with Blackbird Revolts, you guys have done a lot of organizing since the murder of George Floyd in your respective cities. That's not too far from where you guys are. And Lauren, I know that you mentioned, recent things that have been happening in Detroit and the activism that you guys have been doing. And Antoinette, you've mentioned a swath of activity that you've created. If I, as a designer, or I, as a creative who has not jumped into industry yet, or may still be a student or on my way to becoming a collegiate student, what advice would you give me, and how can I start also utilizing my abilities to assist others?
If I could jump in, I get this question a lot from students who will see the work that I do and they're like, I want to do social justice design. How do I do that? I would my advice is really to lead with the issue first. So whatever thing you're advocating for, find organizations that are doing that, gain experience, understand the issues from those people, from folks who have been doing the work, like Antoinette said. And then you can bring your design stuff on the side, but you actually do have to get your hands dirty and actually organize. And that's one thing that Blackbird Revolt does, is that we're not just like, oh yeah, we're reaching out to you so we can make the poster for your next protest. No, we over here on the organizing call 2 or 3 times a week trying to get the thing organized. And so I think that I want to just bring out that point that Antoinette was saying, is we're not trying to do a logo for something or a poster. Yeah, that helps when we're trying to get the message out there, but the organizing part has happened long before we even come to the table and say, here's what the new whatever looks like. So I think I would lead with issue first. Even when you're thinking about an industry jobs that you want to go to, lead with the issue first. Who's going to have the most equitable place for you to thrive? So I think issue first, and then all your talents are secondary to what you've been advocating for.
I would just second that, because I think there's a lot of times that I've watched designers presume expertise because of what we know about design, and kind of think that it can apply to any problem because we are problem solvers, right? Which I don't really say that about myself, but that's a thing that designers say. And so I think with that in mind, I would say just remove that veil and show up in places where You care about people, show up with your neighbors, show up when you, like Terry just said, like show up to the issue and to the place and to the people that you're committed to. Somebody's gonna find you and be like, I need a flyer. Don't worry, it will come. That's not the point though. And I think for me, that's how I've shown up in most of the spaces that I've been a part of, specifically in Detroit. But also as a student, I did organizing work around anti-racism and pedagogy and things like that. And at the same time, even though it was in a design context, it was in the context of a private white supremacist elite institution called Art Center College of Design. It was not because of design, it was just because of the condition of where we were and the issues that were being presented to us. And so there were times at which we would leverage what we knew about making things or facilitating or critique through design, but it was never the point. It was just a way that we knew how to work. And I think for me, that's how I've always come to design, because I came to design late. I got my MFA. I didn't study design as an undergrad. I studied policy and I worked in economic policy for a while. So for me, I come to design interested in the capacity it has to intervene in the social problems that I'm concerned with around racism and oppression and capitalism and things like that. So just, I would emphasize everything Terry said. Don't start with your stellar, type design skills. They will come in handy later, right? But the issue is kind of what has to be the crux of why you're showing up and how you're showing up.
I just want to add to that. Honestly, the people on the ground don't care about your kerning skills. They really don't. I know that's a big deal. Don't get me wrong, I'm an alignment person, but they don't really care. When you look at the impactful movements and signs that we're seeing on the ground, they're handmade, they're authentic. And I think what's important and what should be highlighted from that is that they center their purpose. And so the feedback I would give is really think about what's my purpose and what am I actually working towards that's important for me and my family. Because I stated earlier that this work is hard. And if you are just trying to show up in someone else's space and don't actually have a connection to it, and you don't have an authentic reason on really thinking about not only what can I learn, but what can I unlearn, then you need to probably take a larger look at what you're actually doing. I also would recommend doing the work, and not just doing the work on yourself. Because we have all contributed to harm. We have all also been navigating generational trauma. And so that it requires really reflecting on how is that showing up with me? And does that require me to also, in many cases, ask others to lead through the lens of conformity or whatever it may be that we learned, and actually trying to shatter that at the same time. So even in my organization, when we have monthly staff meetings, we always set aside a time of paired discussion on what did I begin to unlearn last month, because we know that work needs to continue as it goes on. I also, the last thing, I don't know if it's the last thing I would say, but many times we need to think about how do we build trust with the community? And there's an organizer on the ground in St. Louis that talks about building at the speed of trust or designing at the speed of trust, because many times we come into these spaces with agendas and not really, again, think about how that's contributing to harm. But I would also challenge everyone to think about what communities am I actually a part of? Because I am personally tired of designers acting like that we're coming in as if we're these academic pedigree experts or the professional pedigree experts, and forget that the first thing we're coming up in, we should be coming into space with, is us being a community members ourselves. But we too many times come in with this veil and then wonder why we can't authentically try to get work done. And so we need to make sure that we are embedded in the communities in which we're doing the work, and that we are also not at the same time in our good efforts erasing what's already happening in the community. And if you are doing work in a community that's not yours, I would honestly challenge you to ask yourself, why am I actually here? And why am I not doing work in my own community, in my own backyard, which to me is a major product of colonization mindset. And we see this in international development spaces and et cetera. We're so focused on everyone else because, again, we want to focus on empathy and center others and not really hold ourselves accountable to what we've done.
Jordan, would you like to add on to that as well?
I mean, I would just say too, you probably know you ain't really been embedded in the work if you ain't been cussed out by a Black person yet. So like that's your litmus test, you know, or your continued litmus test. You're going to continue to show up and get cussed out, right? And you're going to get cussed out by people at the margins of the margins. So if you are Black designer showing up in community spaces and trying to bring your skills to the table, the organizers on the street are probably going to cuss you out at some point. And that's a good thing. Keep coming back, you know, keep coming back. Show you're for real. If you're for real, you'll keep coming back. If you're not for real, you'll dip, and that's that.
I appreciate you guys. The last question I want to ask this panel, it kind of goes back to a point that Terry, you brought up a little bit earlier today around the ideas of intersections. So we're now at this point where as Black people, we kind of have the floor based on some of the recent atrocities that have happened. How do we use this opportunity in this moment to then also advocate for other people, whether it be through intersections of identity or people that fall on the fringes, Jordan, as you mentioned, of external identities outside of our own? How do we take this opportunity to advocate not just for our rights, but as Erwin said earlier, for the liberties of others as well, who also need that advocacy?
For me, I tend to really think about what spaces do I have the living expertise and the intersection of that, and what spaces do I need to be what I like to call a design ally, not just an ally, you know, not just, again, something performative, but a design ally, someone that's doing the work with you. And so I tell, you know, for example, I give, you know, I can talk about and center my living expertise of being a Black woman, but I can't talk about or center expertise of issues that impact the LGBTQIA+ community. But I can leverage my power and access on behalf and with that community. And so when I think about, you know, what we should be doing, you know, and Teresa talked about this earlier around, you know, equity and liberation, because sometimes we even talk about it through the lens of we need equality. And it's like, don't give me the same, because one, this country was, or this iteration of the country, because let's be clear, there was already a country here before mass genocide occurred. So this iteration of the country was built on the backs of Black folks. And so don't sit here and tell me that you're going to give me the same as other folks that was able to just lay in their little bed and eat some damn cherries. Like, you're not about to do that for me. What you need to provide me is something that actually will look at how do we give people, you know, what they need for them to be their best and authentic self, and not just give people what they need to survive, but give people what they need to thrive. Not just talk about, you know, how do we improve life expectancy, which is very important, but how do we also improve quality of life so that I actually, in the life that I have, you know, I feel like it was a good life. You know, my grandmother today, you know, we went to her funeral. She was 98 years old when she passed away. And one of the things that we learned that some of us didn't know is that she was the oldest out of all her family, and she was the only one that alive. Everyone prior to her had passed away, including her son, including her grandson, which was my grandfather, and my uncle that I talk about a lot. And I know what it was like seeing her growing up, because I was with her when she was cleaning white people's homes. I used to be there with her. And while she was happy, there was also time he was like, man, she kind of mean, you know? And you know, I always wonder, why did she seem like she was angry? And you know what? She deserved to be angry because all the things that she continued to go through. And, you know, that's not just speaking to the fact of being Black, but also speaking to the fact of, in my family, there was also issues of Black and then different abilities, you know, status, where my uncle's leg was amputated before he passed away. And how do we have to navigate that as a family? And, you know, even when we talk about, for instance, the, you know, accessibility movement, you know, we many times center white folks and not really think about the intersection of being Black and also dealing with being neurodiverse or being differently abled, also having a different sexual orientation, being a trans man or trans woman or gender queer. There's so many different things that have been historically underinvested in this country. And that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, as Teresa said, it's about all Black lives. And I mean, we need to think about the intersection of it all and include that in our movement work, and not just center the ones that are cis, that are, you know, Black, cis, able-bodied, and what we like to look at on a poster. You know, we need to also think about how others are trying to navigate this space with all this convoluted oppression and honestly still being asked to show joy.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I show up as a Black queer woman. And so just to reemphasize that, yeah, I show up with my intersections, and that is shown through all of my work. You know, my personal relationship with oppression gives me room to consider and empathize with many of the oppressions, but I don't know it all, right? And so I think we need to be able to show up, I'm gonna use your language there, Antoinette, as a design ally, to be able not to just to say Black lives. You can't say Black lives matter and be homophobic or transphobic or ableist or classist. You can't do that, because there's so many different intersections. I think that oppressive mentality is so detrimental to our movement, because it not only divides our progress and what we're able to accomplish, but that oppressive ideology quite literally kills us in the streets. Like, I can't talk about how much the light needs to be shed on the issue of Black trans women dying in our streets because of transphobia. And so as designers, whether we are Black or not, we have a duty to create those experiences that honor and center the under invested. And so when I think about this, I think that justice isn't biased, right? Justice designs and creates for all of us who are in the margins of the margins, that intersectionality concept that Kimberly Crenshaw had brought to light. And so justice is anti-capitalist. It's anti-Black capitalism. Justice isn't fair. Justice is right.
Mm-hmm. And let me say, I don't have an additional answer. I just also want to say that don't also come up in this space talking about what's legal. Because if I can say many times, there were oppression has been legal for centuries in this country. And I can't tell you how many folks have come on my Facebook page to tell me when I am trying to center Black folks or people of color in my hiring and thinking about where my money's going, because racial wealth gap is a major issue. And if I'm trying to truly do work around racial equity, I can't just keep giving my funding to white-led institutions. And I have had people come to me saying, that's not legal. Don't come to me about legality. Because when we look at the work that needs to also be done to really shift the systems, we're gonna have to also change what we mean by legal.
Lauren, Jordan, would you guys like to add on to that as well?
I think one closing thought that I want to reemphasize something that Terry said about, to be really committed to Black liberation requires being anti-capitalist. And I just want to, I'm there, and I'm trying, it's hard to pull a lot of people along, because I think the expectation is we all want to do well, and the only way that we've seen to do well is to be capitalist, Black or not. And I think, I've heard people talk earlier today about being at the table, right, or having a seat. And to beat the metaphor to death, I'm like, fuck the table, right? This table does not work. The table is doing the harm that we're all talking about in every panel today. And so I'm really interested in how designers can completely think, for example, the ways that we work and the business models that we take up and the ways that we share wealth and profit and construct futures through the actual vehicles of producing design. And so I think it's not cute. Nobody wants to talk about it because we haven't really seen it work in a way that's appealing to enough people for it to become this mass movement. But I think whether it's just having the conversation about a co-op, if it's starting with a studio co-op, which is more palatable than a profit sharing, worker-owned co-op, whatever it is. I think those are the conversations I really want to see designers have, because they don't have answers yet, I don't think. And I think they're not sexy, and they're not quickly resolved. And I do think we like things that kind of can be buttoned up that way. But I think if I could reemphasize anything, it would just be that there's no way for us to actually deal with any dimension of racism without really questioning, critiquing, and then just blowing up what capitalism is and has been. And so that would be, if I could give a parting word, that would be it.
I love it. Jordan?
I 100% agree.
All right. So I want to take this time before calling everybody back to, again, acknowledge my respect and admiration for the work that you guys all do. There, in a lot of ways, is an underappreciation for a lot of the stuff that we do as designers and a lot of the stuff that you guys have accomplished in your own respects in your own spaces. And one thing I remember that my mom used to always say to me, if anybody knows me, I'm always quoting my mom, but she used to say, the good that you do today may never be repaid to you directly, but it may be repaid to your children or your children's children. Even if it's as small of a gesture as you helped your neighbor bring their child to school the next day, that child may grow up and in turn do something for your child or your child's child because of the fact that you've done great work. And the thing that I really appreciate about all of you is that I see longevity in the impact that you guys will have. And if no one else tells you that, I appreciate all that you guys do. I take inspiration from what you guys do, and it inspires me to continue doing what I'm doing. And I'm hoping that the people that watch this also take inspiration from the work that you do and the words that you've shared. Now, the one thing I want to ask you guys, since we're a little bit over time already, is can you guys, which was an idea that Terrence shared, give us one word that sums up where you feel the state of Black design is today? Whoever wants to jump in and go first is more than welcome to.
I think Terrence has to go first, right? It's his idea.
Hey, I'm cool with that, Terrence.
I'm trying to see if I am back.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, kind of dark. But so the state of Black design, I'm actually hopeful for where we are right now because we have amazingly beautiful panels like this, and it's something that I never had access to before. I think if we all stick together, work hard, and trust each other, there's a lot of space for us to grow together.
Awesome.
Hopeful. There you go.
Hey. Maurice, what do you think?
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
okay, Larry.
Wow. Where the state of Black design is right now, I would say it is kinetic. That's more of an adjective, but like I feel there's a lot of movement that's happening in a lot of different spaces in a lot of different ways, and so definitely kinetic.
I love it. Larry.
I was going to say, I think that we are at a renaissance period, and Black design being a major part of that. But I think that communication, identity, all of those things are at a head right now. And I think that the pandemic is sort of a brewing pot for a lot of things right now. And I think that we can use that energy in a really positive big bang kind of event in regard to Black design, Black creativity, and Blackness in general.
So what was the one word?
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
I don't know how to. I don't know how to make that well, yeah, it's a renaissance.
I'm going to say my word because for the alliteration. So my word is radical. And I think radical usually takes on a negative connotation, but when it's a time to do something that's against the norm and is a big change and a shift, I think that's the type of movement that we need and just momentum that we need to be in, that it's going to take just not little things, but big shifts to really radicalize systems, cultures, and the design space.
I'm going to say community, just because I think there's been a lot of events where we've talked about this. We've been seeing new faces, reaching out to more people. So especially in the last 3 months, I've just felt so much community just come together. But I'm going to leave it at that because it was one word.
I can jump in here. I think the word I would use would be and I don't know if this is the right word, but to me it sums it up. I would say emboldened, because I think we really have to stand out, as we always have done, right? This isn't a time for us to shrink back. So if there are young people watching this live stream, and I hope they are, be emboldened. Or as they say in Jamaica, big up your chests, right? Come with pride, right? Big it up. Yeah. Have the pride. Yeah.
So my word is going to be emancipatory, because if I don't say emancipatory, it wouldn't be me, right? And I think emancipation and emancipatory, that is about liberation and freedom and self-focus. And so me, that is like what is really important about Black design, you know, doing Black design for us, for Black people, to tell our own stories, to emancipate us from whatever is holding us back.
You guys are so positive, but you know I'm not going there. I think my one word is complicated, right? You know, it's complicated in where we are, where we're going to be, how we're going to do this, when is it going to happen, who's going to make it happen. Like, it's complex in this. And I think in understanding that it is complicated, the complexity is because we know this, it's how we should prepare. It's how we should be. It's how we should position ourselves. It's how we need to be able to activate and advocate for others.
I'll go next. Disruptive, period.
I'll say entitled, and that's a word usually reserved for white people. And I'm thinking about the advice I got from a Black woman who was an art director who put me on my path to design. And she said, go about your business like a mediocre white man who feel entitled. So I was like, all right, I'll do that. So I think Black people, the young folks who are listening, especially the Black designers, feel entitled, you know, that you are owed what you're owed.
And so to jump off of Sam, so anti-compliant. So in a system where we're expected to comply and to kind of feel, you know, marginalized and oppressed, like we can't comply with these expectations that society has for us, and we can't comply with the societal norms and how we're expected to act and how we're expected to be, especially as, you know, folks just try to control every move that we make and every decision and every design, and they try to control the spaces that we're in. So anti-compliant, and then also alive. So, you know, just been so oppressed by so much death and just so much that's happened for decades to our people, and that will probably still continue to happen. But I just want to be able to focus on the life that we should all appreciate and that we should just seek within ourselves and in each other.
I say dope, just dope.
So my word is rageful, and I feel like it requires an explanation, so please don't clown me in the comments. So rageful is usually, it has this negative connotation, but I'm doing some work around rage right now, and I feel like there's ways in which it fuels my work personally. And I hope it's an aspirational word, because I don't actually think most Black designers in the world are as rageful as we could be. And so I would hope that we could amplify that as we go ahead.
Is that everyone?
Am I the last one?
I think so.
Oh, cool. Hyphen word, legacy shaping. Good night.
Well, all right, you guys, I'd like to thank you guys all for participating. I'd like to thank everybody who actually tuned into the broadcast. Please find these designers on LinkedIn, support their endeavors, and let us know if there's future events like this that you'd like us to host. We'd like to thank you guys again. All of our panelists, I'd ask you guys to pause, well, turn your mics off and your camera off so we can end the broadcast and then convene afterwards. Everybody, you guys have a good night. Take care.